Imagine spending your New Year's Eve crafting what you think is an inspiring national address, probably rehearsing it multiple times, getting your team to polish every word, and then having it absolutely demolished on live radio with three devastating words: totally out of touch. That's exactly what happened to Keir Starmer when a caller phoned into LBC's Shelagh Fogarty show and proceeded to eviscerate the Prime Minister's New Year's Eve speech so thoroughly that even the broadcaster couldn't help but laugh. The caller didn't just disagree with Starmer's message, they suggested that whoever wrote it should be fired, or if he wrote it himself, he should fire himself, which is possibly the most creative way to call someone incompetent I've heard in ages. And the brutal part? The criticism was about Starmer thinking that promising people a meal out or a holiday would somehow fix the country's problems, as if the solution to Britain's economic woes is just everyone going to Nando's and booking a weekend in Blackpool. So buckle up, because we're diving into why Starmer's attempt at inspirational leadership landed like a lead balloon. What was so wrong with mentioning meals and holidays? Why even friendly broadcasters can't defend these speeches anymore? And whether this is just another example of a prime minister who's completely lost touch with the people he's supposed to represent. This is UK Political Insight, and honestly, this three-word verdict might be the most accurate political assessment of 2025. Let's start with what Starmer actually said in this New Year's Eve address, because context matters when you're talking about political humiliation. He opened with, "Things have been tough in Britain for a while. For many, life is still harder than it should be." Okay, fair start, acknowledging difficulty, showing awareness of people's struggles, standard political stuff. Then he continued, "You long for a bit more money in your pockets, a meal out, a holiday, the chance to make a special family moment extra special." And this is where things started going sideways, because when you're addressing a nation dealing with a cost of living crisis where people are choosing between heating and eating, where food bank usage is at record levels, where families are genuinely struggling to afford basic necessities, telling them they're longing for a meal out and a holiday feels spectacularly tone deaf. The caller who phoned into LBC absolutely did not hold back. They said, "I just think it's a load of bunkum. I think anyone can say what they want. Whoever wrote that for him, or even if he wrote it himself, he should fire the person or fire himself." Load of bunkum. That's not pulling punches, that's throwing the entire boxing ring at him. The suggestion that Starmer should fire himself if he wrote it is particularly savage, because it's essentially saying the speech is so bad that someone needs to be held accountable, and if that someone is you, then you need to remove yourself. It's a no-win criticism. Either you're a bad leader for approving terrible writing, or you're a bad leader for writing it yourself. Then came the knockout line. "It's just not authentic." What I would like to say is the fact that he spoke of a meal out and a holiday as though that will fix things. As though people's lives will change if they can afford a meal out or a holiday. It's just ridiculous. So that just totally highlights it for me, how Shelagh, he is totally out of touch. He is not in touch with society today. Totally out of touch. Three words that encapsulate everything wrong with Starmer's approach. The caller isn't saying they disagree with his policies or think he's got the economics wrong. They're saying he fundamentally doesn't understand the reality of people's lives, that he's so disconnected from ordinary experience that he thinks the measure of improved living standards is whether you can book a travel lodge for the weekend. Shelagh Fogarty's response is almost as interesting as the caller's criticism. She laughed, which is pretty significant. Presenters usually try to remain somewhat neutral, especially on a station like LBC, but even she couldn't help but find the criticism amusing, suggesting it resonated with her on some level. She said it was an interesting place to start the speech, but acknowledged she understood what Starmer was trying to say. Then she dropped this absolute gem. "I don't know why they put these speeches out really. I'm not sure what they achieve." That's a broadcaster with decades of experience essentially saying these political addresses are pointless exercises that accomplish nothing. When even sympathetic media figures are questioning why you're bothering to make speeches at all, you know you've got a communication problem. The thing about the meal out and holiday comment is that it reveals something deeper about how Starmer and his team view the British public. They seem to think people's aspirations are incredibly modest, that what working families really want is just the ability to occasionally go to a restaurant or take a trip somewhere. Now sure, those things are nice, nobody's arguing against meals out or holidays, but framing them as a solution to Britain's problems, as the measure of whether things are getting better, suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of what people people are actually struggling with. They're struggling with energy bills that have tripled, mortgage rates that have exploded, grocery shopping that costs significantly more than it did 2 years ago, NHS waiting lists, crumbling public services. These aren't problems you fix with a weekend in Brighton. The caller's point about authenticity is particularly cutting because it goes to the heart of why Starmer is historically unpopular. We've covered on this channel how focus groups describe him as a liar who only said what he needed to get elected, how people think he has no core beliefs, that he's a political vacuum. The meal out and holiday line fits perfectly into that narrative because it sounds like something a speechwriter thought would resonate with ordinary people without actually understanding what ordinary people care about. It's consultants and advisors trying to sound relatable and failing spectacularly. It's the political equivalent of "how do you do, fellow kids?" It's inauthentic, manufactured, focus grouped within an inch of its life, and people can smell the inauthenticity a mile away. Let's break down why this specific framing is so problematic. When you tell someone whose main concern is whether they can afford to heat their home this winter that what they really want is a meal out, you're minimizing their genuine hardship. You're suggesting their problems are about lacking luxuries rather than struggling with necessities. For someone working 2 jobs just to keep their head above water, the idea that a holiday is the marker of success isn't aspirational, it's insulting. It suggests you think their ambitions are so small, their expectations so low, that the ability to occasionally eat at a restaurant represents meaningful improvement in their life circumstances. The broader context makes this even worse. This is Keir Starmer, the man with approval ratings of -66, the most unpopular prime minister in recorded history, trying to give an inspirational New Year's address. He's already dealing with massive credibility problems. People already think he's dishonest, that he broke promises to get elected, that his government is targeting vulnerable people with tax cranks and benefit cuts. So when he then delivers a speech that suggests a meal out will fix things, it confirms every suspicion people have about him being out of touch. It's like he's actively trying to prove his critics right. Starmer continued in his speech with more standard political fare, saying, "Putting our country back on a stable footing will become our strength. We are getting Britain back on track. By staying the course, we will defeat the decline and division offered by others." This is classic empty political rhetoric. What does putting the country on a stable footing actually mean? What specific policies? What measurable outcomes? Getting Britain back on track is the kind of vague promise that means nothing and commits to nothing. Staying the course sounds resilient until you realize the course everyone's criticizing is the problem. And defeating decline and division is nice-sounding nonsense that could mean absolutely anything. He finished with, "For all the times that have been tough, I hope the festive period has brought good moments. When Britain turns the corner with our future now in our control, the real Britain will shine through more strongly. Happy New Year." Again, what does any of this actually mean? When will Britain turn the corner? What specific indicators will show the corner has been turned? What is the real Britain and how does it shine more strongly? These are the kind of platitudes politicians use when they don't want to commit to anything specific, because specific promises can be measured and held against them. After 52 broken promises about not raising taxes, you can understand why Starmer might be hesitant to make concrete commitments. But vague, inspirational language isn't fooling anyone. The fundamental problem with these New Year's addresses is that they're relics of a different political era. They made sense when prime ministers had actual authority and respect, when people generally trusted political leaders to have the country's best interests at heart, when approval ratings were at historic lows. But when you're as unpopular as Starmer, when people actively loathe you according to polling data, putting yourself on camera to deliver inspirational messages just reminds everyone how much they dislike you. Shelagh Fogarty's comment about not knowing why they bother with these speeches anymore reflects that reality. These addresses don't build support or inspire confidence. They're just opportunities for people to pick apart every word and confirm their existing negative opinions. The totally out-of-touch verdict is devastating because it's impossible to disprove. How do you demonstrate you're in touch with ordinary people when everything you do suggests otherwise? Your policies target pensioners, farmers, and small businesses. Your promises evaporate the moment you're elected. Your approval ratings are the worst in history. And then you give a speech suggesting meals out and holidays are what people really need. You've essentially created a perfect evidence trail demonstrating disconnection from reality. Every attempt to seem relatable or understanding just highlights how unreliable and disconnected you actually are.
What's particularly interesting is the contrast to previous political leaders. Love him or hate him, Boris Johnson had a talent for connecting with ordinary people. His bumbling persona, the deliberately messy hair, the classical references mixed with crude jokes, it all created an image of someone who was authentic, even if chaotic. Tony Blair in his prime could deliver speeches that actually inspired people, that made them believe things could get better. Even Theresa May, who was famously awkward and uncomfortable in public, at least projected a sense of dutiful competence. But Starmer? He's managed to combine the worst of all worlds. He's inauthentic like Blair was accused of being, but without the charisma. He's awkward like May, but without the sympathy. He's dishonest in ways Johnson was, but without the entertainment value. He's just deeply, fundamentally unpopular in ways that seem almost impossible to overcome. The caller's point about authenticity is crucial because modern voters have extremely sensitive authenticity detectors. We live in an age of social media, instant fact-checking, and constant scrutiny. Politicians can't get away with manufactured personas the way they once could. Everything gets dissected, analyzed,